it's interesting now kind of thinking back on it where maybe I was experiencing pain or discomfort, and I had the mindset of like I was young, I was eager, and felt resilient, and that is like, oh, no pain, no gain. Within the first quarter, I started experiencing a lot of pain in my upper lip, like kind of like burning sensation, burning pain, just a loss of range and tone, and I kind of obviously was like devastated and confused. It was totally scary. And I ended up taking 2 extra years for my master's to kind of complete my my playing requirements. That was a journey as well. Like I feel like I'm a fraud if I can't play my horn and I'm teaching. That's when Frankie Lacerdo reached out to me and was like, I've worked with many brass players who have gone through injuries, and I'd be happy to meet virtually. Immediately, it was things I had never heard before. Immediately, I was like, I need to talk to him about my own playing. I talk a lot with my students about, and especially those students, where just how we can take time off and how to listen to yourself. I think that's the biggest thing, where it's how to start trusting when you're feeling overworked. Those that take the time and the rehearsal time to teach those skills or speak to that, even if it's just like 60 seconds of modeling something or just sharing the perspective on rest. I see it firsthand how it strengthens the program.
Hey, welcome back to the show, everybody. Today is a extra special episode. We have somebody who actually was a student of somebody that was a guest on the show. If you remember Frankie Lacerdo from the first season, today I'm privileged to be able to talk to Emily Toth, who is a horn teacher and educator in the Cincinnati area, and had the opportunity to work with Frankie through her own injury. And so we kind of get a little bit of, I don't know if it's a generational education thing, but, you know, it's going to be a lot of fun to talk to Emily today. So welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me and creating the space to hear people's stories and support others through this. This is great.
It's all about community. That's honestly like this show was my capstone project for graduating, since I couldn't do a recital. But I couldn't even have anticipated how much it has helped me through my own injury, and how much it's helping other people through theirs, and educators and all that stuff. But anyway, I'm so excited to hear about your experience, although it was probably really tough.
Yeah.
I'm excited to hear you dive into your experience with injury. So if you want to just go ahead and start wherever you want.
Yeah. So, my name's Emily. I'm a horn teacher in Cincinnati. And so I guess my injury journey, well, just kind of like a little background with just me as a player. So when I was a young player, I guess I could say that like it didn't really come naturally for me, but I worked really hard and didn't really have any what I thought were issues kind of like as a young player. And as I got more serious about it in high school, I would always have those issues of, I went to a very small like county school, and then for undergrad, it was like a small liberal arts college with like a small music program. And so kind of like big fish, little pond, where I felt strong and I worked hard, and, I kind of struggled with the high range a little bit, and, but maybe at the time, it's interesting now kind of thinking back on it, where maybe I was experiencing pain or discomfort, and I had the mindset of like I was young, I was eager, and felt resilient, and that is like, oh, no pain, no gain. We heard that all the time. I think many of us as young people had heard that, and maybe that's why we got into the positions that we're in.
Yep.
And so I got to undergrad, and I was always kind of told when I would take lessons, and I was in a really supportive, like amazing teacher, supportive studio, that I had kind of like a weird looking embouchure, or things were kind of a little bit more offset. I was always told from teachers, or even when I was taking auditions for grad school, like, okay, you used a lot of pressure. We're going to have to do stuff with your embouchure. And so I kind of always had that feedback of like a lot of pressure. And so I went through undergrad seemingly with not really many serious issues. And then I got to grad school, like at my first choice, like at a really great conservatory for my instrument. Within the first quarter, I started experiencing a lot of pain in my upper lip, like kind of like burning sensation, burning pain, just a loss of range and tone. And I kind of obviously was like devastated and confused. Looking back on it, it was like I was in a studio of just incredibly strong players and kind of, again, big fish, little pond, and now kind of in the big leagues and just playing a lot more intensely and loud, and kind of now understanding more about what that injury was, and how it came back later on. It makes sense what was weak and why I was experiencing what I was feeling once I was starting to play more and loudly, like the type of playing. I was super eager, so I was playing a lot more than I should in practicing, because I was so excited to be there. So that was really difficult. You go to school, you pay a lot of money to do what you love. And it was in the first year of my master's degree in performance. And so for the majority of the time, I wasn't playing, or I was recovering and not in ensembles. And so that was a really tricky time, even having an incredibly supportive teacher and studio and ensemble directors as well, which I know people I've worked with, that hasn't always been the case, where you have that supportive environment. It's just like, we need you for this program, so I was very grateful for that. But even with that, it was devastating. It was totally scary. And I ended up taking 2 extra years for my master's to kind of complete my playing requirements. That was a journey as well, where in that first year I had the injury and I took a couple months off from playing, and then slowly kind of worked things back. And kind of in general terms, just the thing I was working on is just, I don't know, kind of trying to firm up my kind of more general instructions, like firm up my corners and try to play more efficiently, kind of just some more broader things. I still had a lot of kind of questions about like why it happened. I still wasn't sure yet. And was slowly getting back in shape, but I was just so determined to graduate on time, like finish in those 2 years. And so I really rushed my recovery much faster than my body was ready for, and like mentally, like what I was ready for. So I tried to do my master's recital in 2 years, and my excerpt board in 2 years, and I failed them. I like literally couldn't. I did not have the endurance. My embouchure wasn't ready, and so that was. I mean, we can talk about that. That was like a huge lesson. Now moving forward, and so took extra time, went to part-time as a student, and was able to work, and then also take more time to complete the playing requirements. And I was so grateful, because I ended my master's degree like playing really strongly, very strong, final recital and excerpt board, and was really happy with where I got to post-injury. It kind of became more of a low horn specialist, throughout all of that. And then, so that was in grad school. So that was like 2010 was when it started. And then I graduated in 2013, and then kind of fast forward to graduating, and then kind of after, and where I fell naturally kind of behind. I was only starting in the next couple years after I graduated to take auditions. Like my goal was to be in an orchestra and hold a position. And so I was starting to take auditions, starting to gig more. I started a private studio, and I quickly fell in love with teaching. And so really started to teach more and play more in my lessons, started to take more gigs, play a lot more high horn. And then in like 2018, 2019, I started to experience that pain that I had felt in grad school. And so for me, it was just like a real intense burning in my upper lip, kind of like where the airstream would be, like in my aperture. Similar experiences of loss of range, especially I would feel it a lot more on the horn when I was playing high and loudly. And even off the horn, like I would just I'd put the horn down, and just for days after, I would just feel this burning sensation in my lip, even like not even touching the horn. And so at that point, I thought I had worked through all my issues, with playing and the injury. And it was incredibly upsetting and confusing. And especially at that point, I was a established teacher in the area. And I was like, well, my goal is to be a master educator. Like, how can I be that if I can't even figure out or teach myself and problem solve like what is going on in my own playing? And so everything kind of, I'd taken a few lessons from people and had some successes and some improvements, a few steps forward, a few steps back. And then it all came to a head pain-wise and ability-wise, like right at the beginning of the pandemic. So like March of 2020. And it was obviously a weird time for everyone, but I was just on the cusp of I was experiencing this pain and having to cancel a whole bunch of gigs, and then the pandemic happened and it canceled everything. And it feels really weird to say, but I was just relieved that I just didn't have any expectations of playing. And I was so burnt out and just sad and confused. And I just didn't want to touch my horn. And the pandemic allowed me the space to set that aside. And so didn't play for months. I was teaching a lot virtually. And again, just wrestling with I feel like I'm a fraud if I can't play my horn and I'm teaching. I really kind of grappled with that mentally. And then it's very random. I had a student that had an injury actually from a dog biting his face. This is a weird side turn, but it brings me, go for it. Yeah.
No, I was just say that's not the first time I've heard of a brass player having it happen to them. A good friend of mine had that happen to them.
Oh, so crazy.
Thankfully, they're still playing now.
Yeah. It was a student of mine, and he recovered and everything, but it was something I'd never dealt with. And I mean, it was here. So I knew it was going to affect things. And so
Right.
I just reached out on one of the horn forums on Facebook and was like, I've dealt with injury, but I've never dealt with this type of tear and this type of injury. So want to know if anyone's experienced this before. He has stitches. And that's when Frankie Lacerdo reached out to me and was like, I've worked with many brass players who have gone through injuries, and I'd be happy to meet virtually. So with your student. So we had a session where it was my high school student and me and Frankie, and of course he's in Western Australia. So that was really cool. And so as he was talking with my student, and he immediately, it was things I had never heard before, as far as the anatomy of our face and what's connected and how that related to my student, and exercises to do off the horn to help with the scar tissue. And immediately I was like, I need to talk to him about my own playing. And so from there, I began having sessions with him, and my mind was completely blown, learning more about the anatomy of our face, just in our general, physiology, but how those muscles operate and how they should operate in a brass embouchure. And it just blew my mind, and it immediately started to answer a lot of questions I had and reflections on my own injury and what had happened. And that kind of started, I feel like, the real journey of recovery and better understanding my own playing issues, or how I got there, anatomically speaking, and how to strengthen myself. So that was probably the best thing for my injury journey and playing, just meeting Frankie and working with him, and then working with actually the doctor that he worked with, Dr. Bronwyn Ackerman, who is kind of at the forefront of research for musicians' injuries out of Sydney, Australia. And so I was able to have sessions with her, and I'm just obsessed and fascinated with the anatomy. I think it's just, I've always been a curious person. I'm in kind of a medical family background. My dad's in clinical research. So I've always asked so many questions, and it's just so fascinating. And I love learning more, and now wanting to help teach others about better understanding at all the age levels, and better understanding how these muscles work, how we can use this knowledge to help us improve upon what we already know about playing and teaching at the highest level. So it's, I just think it's so great and can help so many people.
You see me looking down, and the reason why is because I'm taking so many notes of what I want to.
Oh no, that's great.
Go into. Yeah. This has been so. I mean, there are so many parallels to our journeys that it's just super. I don't know if exciting is the right word to use in this context, but I'm pretty pumped.
Yeah, no, this is great. I love talking about this stuff. So This is a great pairing. Yeah.
So, I kind of want to back up to something you said right at the beginning. First of all, I want to just acknowledge just the work that you've been able to do because of your injury and all the people you've been able to help. It's wonderful just to see people using trials, obstacles, right, as ways to help people. I think that's one of the greatest things we can do as injured musicians is find out some way, even if it's just one small way, that we can, help people going through similar things. And so I just wanted to acknowledge that right off the bat. But the second thing was towards the beginning. I don't want to misquote you. Tell me if I'm wrong, but you had said that you had kind of grown up in a smaller band, school music program situation.
Yeah.
Same
small
deal.
Town, rural. I had 30 kids in my band in high school. And then, I went to, a smaller liberal arts school for my undergrad, but yeah.
Well, I'm from rural Pennsylvania, so
so you get it.
a little, can be a tough thing.
Yeah.
And with that comes a lot of pressures that I think can be really difficult for students to deal with, and educators. And so, from your perspective, now having taught musicians of all ages about this type of stuff, how could a small school band director, or a student that feels kind of that pressure, how could they create situations in which they can play healthfully, even though there's those kind of not time constraints, but there's not that depth chart in their band program that they can rely on. There's a study, a research article that was done in the International Trumpet Guild conference journal a couple of years ago. I found it while I was doing some research for a paper, and this professor noted that this was a big cause, although not right away, could be a big cause of injury in students, because people like us, when we get to those college situations and we just have all that passion for the music, I always say I was a kid in a candy store, right? When I first got to music school, especially
I couldn't have said it better myself. Yeah.
my school, the school I just graduated from is very renowned. It's the best school in my state, and for music, and just had all these opportunities. And so I wanted to take all of them. And so if you want to also kind of touch on that, of how a person coming from a similar situation could, I don't know if setting boundaries is the right way to put it, but look at their music education from a more holistic perspective, in that there's all these opportunities, but there does need to be a balance and stuff like that. So it's kind
Oh,
of a
yeah.
combo question, you know?
Yeah, that's so interesting because I hadn't ever thought of it that way. Or if I'm getting this right, like being in that small school environment, and I teach students like this, and all of a sudden it's like clicking, kind of what you're saying, where it's there's there are so many opportunities. It's like if you're the only great horn player, it's like you're going to always play the first parts. You are always going to play in all of the bands, especially if it's something you really enjoy. And you can easily get spread too thin. Is that kind of what you're speaking
Yeah,
to?
exactly. Because for
Yeah,
me, that was that was part of what made it so hard to take the time off that I needed to, because I had my hand in so many cookie jars, you know?
Oh, absolutely. And I'm just thinking about that from the young age of like just junior high and high school and how that started. And I hadn't thought of how that might have set up that mindset, just from like an early age. And then same thing with my undergrad too, where it was on the smaller side. And so many of us would double up on ensembles, or like both the bands and then the orchestra. And then especially if you, backing up, like in high school and when you're a young player, it's like if you're again the big fish in the little pond, it's like, well, and you have like a type A personality, or have perfectionism, maybe that's how it all begins. It's just like, well, I've got to keep, like I want to be the first chair, I want to have all these opportunities. And then that carries on when you are in that larger situation, like in a conservatory, in a larger school where there is the depth, and trying to get back up to that level and overdoing it. And so I totally see the relationship of that. It's so interesting to think about. And I think about that now I have students kind of in that similar, very much in that similar situation. I see myself in them, and that is really tricky. I want to think about that one where I think on one hand, sharing opportunities for them where they can see this on a larger scale and see that, in those more advanced extracurricular ensembles that they might be a part of, kind of the world out there, and how there's a lot of people out there, and where that could be a way. But then also, I talk a lot with my students about, and especially those students, where just how we can take time off and how to listen to yourself. I think that's the biggest thing, where it's how to start trusting when you're feeling overworked, and that isn't a failure, or that doesn't mean that you're a great musician. And that's so hard, I feel like, to teach a young person, or even ourselves, to listen to that voice, where and I try to, I think people in I think this, I'm kind of going in a lot of directions, but I think this is your question of like how, I think you said like how as teachers or how as directors we can watch and make sure that this doesn't happen or, that we don't overwork ourselves. And I think modeling that, we're being like, hey guys, maybe as a director, or even myself, I tell my students, it's like, I had a lot on my plate. I had life stuff like this, like I just had a daughter, a 10-week old, like in my personal life. And so I'm sharing those experiences of, I put the horn down for 6 weeks. I love music. I love teaching you all, but I had other things in my life that I wanted to give my full attention to, and that's okay. And even on a smaller level, where I actually have a student recently, say like, I want to make sure I get in practicing every single day, and it's okay. How can we talk about how it's okay to take a break? Is we're not taking away from your progress, that it's actually going to help your playing. Of course, physically, but mentally, I'm thinking even more so, like just clearing the slate and giving your brain a brain break and then coming back more refreshed. And so I think in modeling and sharing how we do that in our own lives, and maybe if we don't, that's a great time for reflection on just how we set up, in little ways, like how we set up boundaries of, I'm just thinking for myself of, these are the hours that I teach, or this is when I'm able to answer your questions. And maybe that gives students just starting to build that foundation of, oh, I can say no to certain things, and that's healthy. Or that I can, oh, well, Miss Toth is a professional musician and she took a day off, or she's taking time off, and she doesn't seem to be worried about that. Like, maybe that's okay. And so I think in modeling, if that makes sense, like how we can share our own stories with students to help maybe combat, because they're enthusiastic. They love it. We loved it. We want to do all of the things, but teaching how that to be strong and to do the things that you're most passionate about, there is engagement and rest. And I think modeling that might be a great start.
That's a beautiful answer. That's a question that's very close to my heart, obviously, since I grew up in a situation like that. But, before my injury, I was a music education major, and with all the best intentions. And I think anybody who wants to become a music educator of any kind does it because of the love of the music and love of teaching. The vast majority of them, at least. And a lot of them find themselves in situations where they feel like they're not ideal, right? The situation is not ideal, and that their hands are tied, or they feel the pressure from the school district or from the parents to put on this huge, program. And that, like I said, with all the best intentions, like my heart goes out to them. But there are certain things that need to be taught in addition to the music that up until, at least from my experience, they weren't really discussed. And I think that one of my guests from last season, she was a violist, and she did her dissertation on injury. I'm probably going to water it down too much, but injury prevention in the beginning string classroom.
And that's awesome.
And I mean, it's from a pedagogical standpoint, injury prevention starts on day one, in my opinion. From a psychological standpoint or a mindset standpoint, injury prevention has to start from day one now, because we're so impressionable as young students, or even old students. You have a student who's just picking up the horn for the first time in high school, and they feel like, oh, I got to catch up to the guys who have been playing since they were 5.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
And that creates unhealthy mindsets. And once they get to the collegiate level, if that's what they choose to do, that's where I've seen in myself those basically, taking things faster than I have the ability to do so. And I'm not talking from a musical standpoint. I'm talking from a lifestyle standpoint.
Oh, totally.
And that is what, especially contributes to overuse injuries. I don't know if you have any other thoughts about.
Yeah, I think a lot about that, where that's so hard for students, when they're getting that pressure from their director. And like you said, like my heart goes out to them, because it's like, we all know that at that level, like for directors or the teachers, like they're trying to balance so many things, and like being recognized so they get funding, like there's so many dynamics that we don't see. And but then it's so hard for then the student, because then what they're hearing is like, I can't stop. If I don't practice today, like I'm not going to be recognized, or what are my peers going to think, like I want to impress my band director. And that's for that age, like it's such an impressionable time. And it's just everything, especially if you're a really excited, passionate, young musician. I mean, even now. And so, I'm thinking from like the private teacher standpoint, that is tricky, because I can't not speak to that to my student, as far as like, look, and I will just kind of call it out how it is, like your band director has so many things on their plate, and there's a lot going on, and this is what their goals are. And you can be in line with those goals, and you can keep on your progress for these reasons. And, you're going to take information from them. You're going to take information from me. And these are the reasons why I think this is going to be helpful for you. And you just got to be careful. I have your best, I'm just trying to look out for you, and you can kind of work through the information, and see what works best. But that's so hard for young people and older people like ourselves to, especially if we're, I've always felt like a people pleaser as a young person. And so like wanting to be at that high level and feeling like a perfectionist and wanting to, again, it all stems from wanting to feel part of a team and community, and how, again, going back to like, how can we have those conversations with our young people, like on that first lesson, or at least kind of set the environment to be supportive and listen, but also share the realities appropriately, at the different ages of, take time and don't spread yourself too thin. Not even in like music related things, but like in hearing their struggles with academics and just, that's a tricky one. Especially, but I think so much about that for the young ones, like how can, even what I've learned in my recovery, but that mindset is like, how can we as educators instill that early on in how we model, or at the different, whether it's like a beginner 5th grader or a 17-year-old, 18-year-old getting ready to audition for music school.
Yeah, totally. What I've just realized my injury happened pretty much 2 years ago at this point, and I'm still working through it. And what I've just realized is that, first of all, the ideal situation is that these things are taken care of for beginning students. But if they're not, we are all still impressionable beings.
Yeah.
We are still all, no matter what age we are at or where we are in our playing or career, we still have the ability to make the shifts that will ultimately bring massive gains to our playing and to our lives. I've been so fascinated by not only the things I've learned from a trumpet standpoint, my instrument, in the mechanics of playing that I didn't know before my injury, but most of all, the things that made the most difference in my life is just seeing how like these different mindset shifts or lifestyle shifts have brought me to such a better place with my instrument. And I think that, this is the type of work that just needs to be done personally.
Yeah.
And in group settings. I think it can be done in group settings, like in a band room. Like you said, the power of community within a band program can be used to the advantage of the band director and obviously to the advantage of the individual student. I guess humbly, I would just invite those listening that it just means that maybe it takes some rehearsal time to have these types of conversations, but the investment on your time will be much greater than if you were just kept working on the same passage or something.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I see that in a variety of different programs in my area, where it's, those who I've seen it firsthand, those that take the time and the rehearsal time to teach those skills or speak to that, even if it's just like 60 seconds of modeling something or just sharing the perspective on rest, or any of those things that we've mentioned. It's going to be a stronger team. It's giving students permission to be like, wow, I am really tired. Someone just gave me permission that I can just I need that for my mental health to just not practice on Saturday. We don't know how that ripples out. And I see it firsthand how it strengthens the program, over time, where it's like the students feel autonomy and agency and permission to ask questions and to be curious about these things. Maybe when they're afraid to say like, I'm really overworked, or this is just like, I can't be in these 2 ensembles, it's just like, I'm starting to feel pain, but I don't want to say that because I don't want to not be first chair. I've heard these conversations in my students, and it just takes the person at the top 60 seconds of sharing a story or speaking to, giving advice to another student, you don't know who hears that and how that affects them, like the ripple it has.
Hey guys, hope you're enjoying the show. I just wanted to jump in here real quick and tell you about something that I'm really, really excited about. For a while now, I have wanted to create an even more effective resource than just the podcast that injured musicians can go to receive the support that they need. And recently I did just that. So write this down. Trust the Process Podcast Injured Musician Support Group. I know it's a long title. We're still working on that part. But this is a place where people can go now, injured musicians and even musicians who have gone through injury in the past, and people that help musicians go through injury, where they can go to receive the support that they need, whether that be ask questions, share their victories, share their frustrations, and overall just receive the community and the support that they need in a very proactive, intentional way. And so I just ask that you guys support these injured musicians by sharing this group with them, that they can receive the support that they need. Okay, enjoy the rest of the show. Yeah, and speaking to type A personalities like myself, the fear, I think, I'm pretty sure most people I've had on the podcast could identify with that. I think the fear associated with taking time off is that not only will you fall behind, but that you're going to start slacking off, or you're going to abuse that time off, or whatever the case may be.
Or you're perceived as that.
Yeah, that's our perception. But I think we can all agree that most of us, that's not how we roll.
Yeah.
With like how we work, we're always going to be putting the time in. Mm-hmm. We just have to be making sure we're putting the time in for all the good things, not just the practice time and all that stuff. And just giving ourselves the license to get curious about what else is out there to help us become better musicians. Because the research, the technology that we have now, everything at our fingertips is to the point where the model that we've had for teaching music for the last, throw a number out, like 300 years probably, it's kind of outdated.
Yeah.
I'm just going to come out and say it. It's
and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just things change over time. We learn new information, and yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, that topic alone could be 3 podcast episodes.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. And the curiosity bit, I feel like that is just has been a theme in my recovery, and it just permeates everything now. Is just in my teaching and my own playing, getting back into shape. It's just keeping that curious mindset of, oh, I have this sensation that's interesting, or here's what I'm observing, or how we listen to our students, how we teach, keeping that open mindset and that curiosity versus the fear or judgment of this being good or bad. It's just well, that's curious. How did I get there? Or what set me up to sound like that? Or I missed that. That's interesting, and just how that, I believe, is just a much healthier mindset, where it's we're not afraid to make mistakes. We're showing our students, and hopefully teaching our students, that creating an environment where they're not afraid to make mistakes, because that's where the growth and the
absolutely,
where you learn stuff from. So the curiosity bit, I think, is just so important.
Same. That's been a huge game changer for me too. It just brings objectivity into a very subjective art form.
Oh, absolutely.
And, so anyway, the other thing I wanted to really tackle with you is I didn't love that you went through it, but I loved hearing that you said it, because this was my experience as well with, you said in your master's degree towards the end, you were trying to kind of race to the finish line in a way, and force yourself to do things your body wasn't ready for. Mm-hmm. That's basically my last 2 years in a nutshell, right?
Yeah, I feel you. Yeah.
And I kind of have just realized that there can be a lot of toxicity in creating our own timelines for our recovery. And that has a lot to do with that inner work that we were talking about. In fact, probably more than anything else, or that toxic timeline is probably an outgrowth of that inner work not being done than probably anything else, because we're feeling that pressure, that external pressure, and heeding it to check a box, or to do something that we really love. I mean, I don't want to sound like I'm vilifying a music degree or anything.
Totally. Yeah.
You know, we all, the vast majority of us, hopefully, have gotten into this because we love it. And the reason why we're kids in candy stores is because we love candy, right? We love playing and
yeah, it's fun.
we love doing it. And to not be able to do that anymore is really, really tough. And we want to get back to that as soon as possible.
Yeah.
Looking back on that time specifically, what is one thing that you would tell that version of you that was trying to kind of race against your body's clock?
Yeah. Well, because I did, it got me, it completed the journey of what I had learned from that. But if I did have to go back, what is really thinking, what is the worst that could happen if I just didn't graduate on time? What's the worst, Emily, what's the worst that could happen?
Student loans, probably.
Say that. Oh, well, yeah.
That's not no joke, but
yeah. And that's why. And then what's the worst of I went down to part-time students, so I didn't have to pay as much. It's what is the worst that could happen if I took time off from school? And maybe the answer would be well, actually, no, maybe I should do the original path. But just what's the worst that could happen professionally? What's the worst thing that could happen school? Just ask myself those questions, because I was very one-track mind about it, and very, it was fueled by, you're saying the toxicity, like feeling shame and embarrassed, and but of course, looking back on it, it's just that was only internal. I wasn't getting that feedback from other people. Maybe if I had had more conversations about how I was feeling about that, and not just about getting back in shape music wise, about here are my fears, or I'm thinking of taking extra time for myself. I wouldn't have not been supported, but maybe asking and having those conversations of what is the worst that could happen, and realize that, it wasn't as bad taking extra time or going more slowly. In fact, with the goals that I wanted, it would have been more in line with those. But I was very blinded by the initial plan and sticking to the initial plan.
That's it right there.
And the plan can change, and what's wrong with that? I got new right? And it's I got new information. This is going to take longer than I originally thought. And, or even, and I think I forget what another one of your episodes where it's just what you want changes, and recognizing, or what your goal is changes. And, I felt like this in grad school, where it's okay, professional orchestral musician or college teacher. And it's if it wasn't one of those paths, then it felt kind of like a failure, or I wasn't as good as. And so related to that, it's just what is my end goal? And maybe just sitting down and asking myself, what's the end goal and what's the worst that could happen? And taking more space to answer those questions. That would be interesting.
Just taking the time to sit down and answer those questions with yourself, right?
Yeah.
Which we never feel like we have enough time for, but we don't have enough time not to do it,
Yeah, right. Because it's a lot of work to be a music student and for a degree. And it's it feels like there's no time to pause. We just got to keep going. But if the end goal is to play professionally, or just play at a high level, teach at a high level, it's just, there are many avenues to that. And perhaps the avenues are not what you expected, and to be curious and take time to reflect on those. And I think I was just full steam ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. It's so, man, we basically have the same story.
Yeah. And it's helpful. Yeah. Talking to other people about it. I think maybe, I had my close group of friends and my teacher that I talked to, but, maybe there are others that if I was more open and didn't feel as much shame around that or embarrassment that would have similar stories, and then it'd feel like creating that community, which is what's happening here. To have permission to maybe go a slightly different path than what I thought originally, and then that is also successful, or it doesn't even have success attached to it. It's just, the process.
Yeah. It's the process, it's path. Yeah. I think the more I've just experienced what I've experienced, the more I realize that what we're really aiming for, most of us, I would assume all of us as musicians, is longevity in our career. Or else that's a lot of work to be doing for just a couple of years and then just to put it away. Now, that being said, there are people who go into music school fully knowing, or they understand later on that, hey, I'm going to go to med school, or I'm going to go into business school after this. And I'm just loving what I'm doing now. I have tons of friends who do that, and that's awesome, right?
Yeah. I wish more people talked about that. Or maybe they do in your experience, but that it's just like, hey, I have these multiple interests. And people are pursuing that. And I think that is a great balance too, where I've known people who were doing two completely different things, again, music, performance, and a STEM field. And then later, after they pursued the non-music path, they came back to music and are now in major orchestras. I mean, it's just or at whatever level that you want that brings you enjoyment, but that it's not a now or never type thing. There are obviously big obstacles along the way, and as your life continues and more responsibilities, but it's not this now or never. It's who told us that? I don't know. Maybe it was just in my head.
I think there's also that's a big part of the rhetoric that we hear in other parts of our lives. That's just my thought. But I interrupted you. What was that last part of your thought?
No, just kind of continuing that, where it's just internal, or maybe, systematic, just wanting to, feeling that urgency that if I don't do this now, I'll lose my chance or my opportunity. But if you, going back to the community bit and being a good citizen of that community, I mean, people are going to want to play with people who are team players, or not just play, teach with, or in whatever aspect of life. And it's just if you stick with those core beliefs and that core foundation of how you're approaching the process, or the curiosity, that great things are gonna happen in whatever fields or in whatever situations. And it's just trusting that. I mean, not to get too corny with that, but name of the podcast.
Name of the podcast. Yeah. So
it's
I think we already got the corn covered at this show.
Full of it. Yeah, no, it's great. But and how, again, going back to how we as educators can model that and have these conversations and just share those experiences of our life with our students. And then when they experience maybe not the same thing, but similar forks in the road, that they're, and those challenges, that they remember how it was modeled for them and make them have more confidence in their inner knowing and in their own curiosity of problem solving. So I think it's so important.
So good. So good. Well, hey, Emily, this has just flown by. I looked down at how long we've been talking, and I couldn't believe it.
Oh my gosh, I could keep talking.
Yeah, we
this
could.
Is great.
The one other thing I really wanted to dive in with you, is kind of your time with Frankie. Frankie is part of a wonderful organization that him and his colleague, Gabriel Radford, who's I believe the third horn in the Toronto Symphony. They created something called the Embouchure Project, and I had the privilege of helping them produce a podcast. That's
awesome. I've been following that.
Yeah.
I've been following that and starting to dig into some of their episodes, and so that's so awesome. I'm so excited to see that. Yeah.
Everyone listening, once you're done with this episode, go check out the Embouchure Project. But I wanted to, you said something that I thought was really interesting. You said that Frankie answered a lot of questions for you that you realized you had, or that you
Yeah,
never
like
realized you had? And so what were some of those?
yeah, well, especially just as he began teaching me more about what he learned and the, better understanding the anatomy of our embouchure and in breathing. And so through those lessons, kind of it was the first time that I had heard someone speak so specifically about muscles in the face and in our breathing. And it just, it answered so many questions I had had just in my horn playing journey of like, wait, how do we physically do this? And I would ask that question a lot with my teachers. And I mean, they were great teachers. This is not a knock on them, but so in, traditional pedagogy, at least in my experience, I would hear, don't think too much about the muscles. And it's always a balance. We can always hyper focus on anything, right? Anything at all. And it's a balance. It's important to zoom in and then zoom out. But specifically with that education that he gave to me, it was like the blueprint for so many, to answer so many questions I had had about my own playing and thinking about students' issues that they had had and being a very eager teacher and a very curious teacher and problem solver. I didn't know how to approach certain things, especially with like embouchure changes in my students, until I learned those lessons from Frankie and Dr. Ackerman. So it was a lot of learning about those mechanics at that like muscular level, which was just like light bulb moments all over the place, where it was just like, this just totally makes sense with what I was feeling and how when I had made that motion or made that adjustment in my embouchure, this happened. And it was just so exciting, even though it was like the most challenging professional and personal time, of my life, that it was so exciting because it was just like these new tools in my toolbox that I could use for myself and my students. So yeah, that was kind of what I was speaking to with that.
Cool. I mean, I'm actually working with Dr. Ackerman now, and she is wonderful.
Oh, awesome.
She gives
mind-blowing
so much time to this, and I'm so humbled that she's able to work with me. But so for the educators and students at home, what's maybe one I guess myth that Dr. Ackerman and Frankie helped you debunk, specifically about the muscles? Like, don't be afraid to get like super technical for this part.
Yeah. Well, like two things at first. Well, and I know Frankie has spoken to this in like Dr. Ackerman in her like lectures and stuff, but this paralysis of analysis, that if we think too much about the muscles, this was something definitely for like the educators or just like traditional brass pedagogy, that if we think too much about the muscles, that we're going to lose our musicality and our artistry. And I think Dr. Ackerman said, but what are we basing that analysis on? Is it the actual muscles and how they work in our embouchure? And it should be based on that. So I think, I don't know if that's necessarily a myth, but that thinking about the muscles or learning about the muscles is it's just going to freeze us up, that we're unable to play. I totally disagree. And I think at every level we can introduce it, or just like we do in sports, like at a young age, like you want to strengthen these muscles so you run faster, or that you have this flexibility. And, young people can understand that. And so I think incorporating it at the different levels, I think that's a myth. I think we can totally do that. I think it takes time to kind of reflect on what is most effective, and how we approach that. So that would definitely be one thing. And then just like getting into the nitty gritty about like the muscles, the role of the upper lip and the bottom lip. So that was kind of a big mind-blowing thing for me. And also, I guess you could say like, I don't know, a myth or maybe, I don't want to say misinformation because that sounds like nefarious. People aren't trying to give misinformation. It's just like,
absolutely not.
We don't know something, we learn about it. And then it's just like, wow, I was completely opposite with that. But with the muscular structure in our face, the upper lip is connected to a lot of muscles that are anchored all the way up to our skull. And so it is strongest when it is more still and stable. And so I'm like, whoa, like when I was in my first stretch of my injury, I was just constantly trying to manipulate my upper lip and like flex my upper lip. And it was pulling. And the reason is because there's a lot of smaller, weaker muscles that you end up starting to pull on. And that can create weaknesses and possibly, pain. And that the bottom lip is a lot more flexible because of its placement on the jaw and not being connected to as many muscles. And so the bottom lip is incredibly helpful in adjusting our aperture sizes at all ranges. And so that we don't think about that, or at least as horn players, there's we have heard a lot, like really anchor into the bottom lip. Really anchor in there. It can take a lot of the brunt of that, but we lose depending on the size of your lips. We can lose that flexibility and that vibration that we need from that bottom lip. So anyways, the upper lip being more stable and that the bottom lip being more flexible. I had it all like just after learning, if that makes sense, like after learning the roles in the anatomy, that was like so opposite from what I was taught, no one's fault, or what I understood about that. And so that was, I guess you could say a myth or just,
Yeah, and I try to avoid using myths because, like you said, it's not like we are trying to lie to people or
no, not at all.
And the myth just has cheese whiz all over it, but that was the word that I came up with in the moment.
Yeah, totally. Where it's just like, wow, I didn't know that. We have more information to better understand those things because again, it takes so much to be a professional musician or even just to learn an instrument, whether or not you're going to be professional. So a whole anatomy, incorporating that into the education, that might seem kind of overwhelming, but man, it was just so helpful for me. And I think young players are totally going to understand those things. And yeah.
And there's so much good information out there. Like we said, the Embouchure Project has great. I mean, we're talking the top neurologists, physiotherapists
so exciting
in the world on this show, and talking about specifically brass embouchures. Just a wonderful resource for any pedagogue, any teacher who's out there just listening to this. Like, gosh, did I really get this wrong? And if you did, I mean, like you said, like we've been saying, that's not something to feel guilty about. It's just,
and that's so
we've
hard.
Updated the research. That's all it is.
Yeah. And that's another thing too, that's a great thing to model to our students, where it's just like, I mean, I definitely felt that way, where I was like, I learned this stuff and I could think of specific times that I taught something kind of the opposite of what I was now learning, like anatomically is the case, and having grace with yourself and just, being like, oh, I didn't know the information, but I do now. This is exciting. Hey, this is actually how it is. And showing that, I think, again, modeling that to a student, I think is huge too. Like just being like, I actually had that wrong before, but now, hey, I learned this. Let's talk about it. Let's make some adjustments. And yeah, so that's super exciting though about, of course, your platform and just all of the, like in the Embouchure Project and just how it's just so much more prevalent now. And it's so exciting, like sharing these stories.
I think I think the pandemic helped out a lot of musicians in learning about this stuff, because you're not the first musician that has told me that their injury happened right at the beginning of the pandemic. And so they had all this time to learn about this stuff. And now that like content creation exploded during the pandemic, it's like, boom, we're all of a sudden these things are coming to the forefront, which I think is a really beautiful outgrowth of a really confusing 3-ish years.
Oh my gosh,
2-3
absolutely.
years.
Yeah, it just, again, a positive is just like being able to create that community and be more connected with people all over the world. Like I never thought I would have met 2 people from Australia who would have helped me transform my own playing and
join the
teaching,
club,
amazing. Yeah.
So cool. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Emily. This has really, really been fun for me. And like I said, it's flown by, just like, not like any other episode I've done, which has been really fun.
Oh yeah, well, I'd love to chat again. This was great. Thank you so much for what you do, and this is just such a great conversation. I'm so glad we could have it.
Me too. So I've got 2 last questions I ask all my
Mm-hmm.
guests. But before I do ask those questions, where can people find you?
Yeah, so you can find me on social media on Instagram, Emily Toth Horn Studio, and the same on Facebook. And my contact information is there, and I shared a lot about my journey that we talked about today, and I love kind of helping to educate about kind of the muscles and things that we've talked about. So I have a lot of videos and things kind of speaking to what I've learned about our breast anatomy. So you can, check me out there.
Yeah, and her Instagram page is really quite something. There's a lot of great information on there that you need to check out. So definitely go do that. So,
Awesome. Thanks.
Emily, the last 2 questions I ask, I kind of alluded to one earlier, but the first one I ask is, if someone were to come up to you, whether they be a horn player or a different instrumentalist, and say, "Hey, I listened to you talking to Clark on Trust the Process, and I'm going through my own injury. Like, what can you tell me? What advice do you have for me? What's one thing you would tell them?"
Oh, wow.
Regardless of instrument.
Yeah. Well, I'd definitely, having, gone through that, I definitely feel, very sympathetic and just want to listen to them and just hear their story about like what's going on. And to find someone that they feel like they can trust, who's knowledgeable to help, guide them through this process, like having a mentor, having someone that they can trust. And also just I say this as if is so easy to do because it's such a scary thing and it's just really upsetting and confusing, but just to be as curious as you can through that process of mechanically kind of what's going on, and just, keeping that curious mindset, almost like a scientist. I don't know if you're familiar with the author Adam Grant.
Oh,
he's,
yeah.
He's the best. He's
so
my
good.
absolute favorite. But he has a book called Think Again, and he talks about like, it's in conversation with people or like in organizations, but like being a scientist versus like a more judgmental character. So it's just being, a scientist and being curious about what's going on for you, and asking yourself questions physically, what's happening mentally in your personal life, and just keeping like a curious mindset with what's going on, and just trying to be open to new information. And it could be really scary because I know for me, I placed a lot of judgment with doing things the right way. And then when I found out I was doing things the wrong way, like I felt a lot of different things about that. I felt a lot of, shame and judgment for myself. And thinking now, not being, trying to be as objective and non-judgmental and just curious about the process and lead with curiosity, because then it can be a very eye-opening thing without being so judgmental as we learn new information to help ourselves. It's so easy to say, when you're in the throes of just confusion and an embouchure injury. But how we can cultivate that as people who help to guide others through that, leading with that curious mindset.
Man, that just became, I think, the title of the episode, by the way. Lead with curiosity. That's such a good one-liner. Just beautiful way to end it up. The last question I have, Emily, it's one that's also very personal for me, and I'm sure you'd agree, but if you had the opportunity to go back to your master's degree, and you had the power to take away this whole experience of your injury, and you just keep on your path that you had originally planned for, what would you choose? Would you choose to take it away or leave it there?
Leave it.
Why?
I think leave it. I mean, gosh, it's led me to all the things now. I don't know if I would have, gotten in touch with Frankie or learned that way, or all of the mental work and obviously the pain of that and the struggle of that, I wouldn't have gotten those tools that got me through or the other side. Like I wouldn't have learned those, what's the word? Just those skills to get through it, and how that made me a stronger person and have better perspective and being kinder to myself through that, because I didn't feel very kind to myself at first. And there was the only way to get through that is to have had experienced it, and it taught me a lot about myself and actually what my goals were or what I actually want in my career, especially the second time. I think we can all be on those certain paths, and it's because we started out on that path, but is it really the path that we want to, would make us the most happy? And I wouldn't have allowed myself the space to rethink that if I hadn't had those incredibly difficult challenges. So yeah, I'd totally it'd be real painful, but I would keep it in my story for sure.
It's my favorite question to ask on this entire show.
That's a great question. Yeah.
Well, it's, there's a book title. I haven't had the chance to read it yet, but it's on my list. It's called The Obstacle is the Way. I forget who the author is, but it was recommended to me by my aunt. And what a beautiful title, right?
Yeah.
It's been the way for me to completely transform my life and be able to help people. It's been the way for me to I don't know if fix is the right word, but take care of other things that I've had going on in my life that weren't helping me. Mm-hmm. And it was a lip injury, right? And yet it's affected
it's just like the small thing that amplifies everything else.
Like the tear I'll get in the camera frame. The tear is probably that big, right? Mm-hmm. For my injury. Uh-huh. And yet it's completely just transformed my life.
Yeah. And so, even though that was devastating for you, if that hadn't happened, again, not to, I'm sorry that happened, that's super traumatic, but how that, what was the book called? The Obstacle is the Way. Yeah. Yeah. I'm going to have to check that out. Because it does, those obstacles just illuminate so many, the music part, it feels like it's everything, right? But it's really everything else.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, what a beautiful way to end the episode and the conversation. I'm just so grateful for you, Emily, for all the work you're doing. And in our world of brass pedagogy and injury prevention, you're making a big difference. And hopefully the people out there in podcast land think so as well. Those of you listening, thank you so much for joining us today. And this one, I really feel like more than anyone, I think a bunch of the educators in the world need to listen to this more than anyone else. So share it with your high school band director, your middle school band director, your choir director, whoever, because these principles will help so many people through them, because they are helping so many people, and we're so grateful for them. So keep on keeping on, everybody, and keep trusting the process. Take care. Hey, before you go, we need your help with something real quick. Somewhere out there's a musician who is going through an injury or just a tough time. There may even be an educator with a student in that situation that they don't know how to help. We need your help in getting this message to them. Would you do them the favor of sharing this episode on your socials and with your friends? Also, cliche that it may have become, leaving a rating and a review actually does help people find us, not just boost our ego. So would you take a quick second and leave us a review so that musician can find us more easily? If you want to reach out to me personally, I would love to hear from you. Just look for the Send Us a Text Message button in the show notes of the episode. You can do that on any episode on your chosen podcast platform except YouTube. If you have a suggestion for a guest or topic to cover, shoot me an email at trustprocesspodcast@gmail.com or send me a message on Facebook or Instagram. I want to extend another heartfelt thanks to my team, without which this podcast would not be able to happen. Thanks to Daniel Baldwin, our audio engineer, Kevin West, our music and sound effects coordinator, and Dana Lovell, our promotional materials coordinator. So to all of you out there in podcast land, keep on keeping on and trust the process.